Welcome to a deep dive into the work of Robin DiAngelo, specifically her book, White Fragility.
Okay.
We'll be exploring this idea of whiteness
Right.
and how it plays a role in systemic racism,
Yeah.
a topic you mentioned you wanted to learn more about.
That's
We've got excerpts from the book itself and some supporting materials to help us unpack this.
great.
It's going to be good.
Yeah, this is a conversation a lot of people shy away from,
Yeah,
but it's really crucial, I think, to understanding how racism operates,
right.
especially in a U.S. context.
So DiAngelo starts off by really challenging this whole notion of race as like a biological fact. She argues that it's a social construct.
Right.
What does that even mean for those of us who might not be familiar with that term?
It means that race isn't based on inherent biological differences.
Okay.
Instead, it's the category that was created and shaped by society
Okay.
to establish hierarchies and power dynamics.
So how did this concept of race as we know it today come about?
Well, DiAngelo points to some pretty fascinating historical examples.
Okay.
She talks about how even Thomas Jefferson, while grappling with the morality of slavery,
Interesting.
ultimately perpetuated the idea of black people as inherently inferior.
Wait, Jefferson?
Yeah.
The all men are created equal guy.
Exactly. It shows how deeply entrenched these ideas were,
Wow.
even in the minds of those who supposedly opposed slavery.
Yeah.
Jefferson even encouraged scientific inquiry into proving black inferiority,
Oh, wow.
essentially giving birth to the whole field of race science.
It's amazing how scientific thought can be influenced by the desire to justify existing power structures.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this need to justify inequality is key to understanding how the concept of whiteness itself evolved.
Okay.
DiAngelo talks about how different European immigrant groups,
Right.
who weren't initially considered white, were gradually included in this category.
So whiteness wasn't always like a fixed thing.
No, it was a fluid concept that shifted over time to solidify power. This inclusion ultimately reinforced the idea of American as being synonymous with white,
Okay.
further marginalizing people of color.
It sounds like this idea of whiteness goes beyond just skin color.
Yeah.
It's almost like it becomes a form of property.
That's precisely what legal scholar Cheryl Harris argues in her concept of whiteness as property.
Okay.
She says that whiteness grants tangible benefits and privileges
Interesting.
that go beyond simple racial classification.
Hmm.
It's almost like an exclusive club membership with certain perks and protections.
That's a powerful analogy.
Yeah.
It makes me think about things like the racial wealth gap we see today.
No.
Is that an example of these benefits you're talking about?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Things like access to better housing,
Right.
education, and job opportunities
Okay.
are all part of this unearned advantage that comes with being white.
Got it.
It's like starting a game with extra points simply because of your race.
And DiAngelo argues that this system of advantages often operates invisibly right.
That's a crucial point. Many white people are unaware of these privileges
Mm-hmm.
because they've never had to think about race in the same way that people of color do.
It's like the air we breathe.
Yeah,
We don't notice it until it's gone.
exactly.
Yeah.
And when this system of advantage is challenged or even pointed out,
Right.
that's when we see the phenomenon DiAngelo calls white fragility come into play.
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Could you explain what white fragility looks like in practice?
Well, DiAngelo describes it as a state of defensiveness
Okay.
and discomfort
Hmm.
that arises when white people are confronted with their own racial biases
Right.
or the systemic nature of racism.
But doesn't everyone get defensive when they're criticized?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
How is this specific to white people? DiAngelo argues that because white people are often insulated from the realities of racism,
Okay.
they haven't developed the same level of racial stamina as people of color.
Interesting.
So even the slightest challenge to their worldview can feel like a personal attack.
So it's not just about being called racist.
Right.
It's about having their entire understanding of themselves and their place in the world questioned.
Exactly. And DiAngelo argues that this fragility actually upholds racism.
Oh, wow.
By shutting down productive conversations about race,
Okay.
it maintains the status quo.
Yeah.
Because instead of engaging in self-reflection,
Right.
the focus shifts to managing the discomfort of white people.
She talks a lot about the good-bad binary.
Right.
And how it fuels this fragility.
Yeah.
Like, people believe that as long as they have good intentions, they can't possibly be racist.
Right. And this binary allows white people to disengage from these conversations
Right.
by claiming that they are good people.
Yeah.
And therefore incapable of racism. but it ignores the fact that even well-intentioned actions can have harmful consequences.
So it's not about judging people's hearts,
Right.
but about understanding the impact of their actions within a larger system.
Yes.
Exactly. DiAngelo argues that we need to move beyond this simplistic good-bad binary
Okay.
and acknowledge that we all hold biases, whether we're aware of them or not.
Yeah.
And those biases can have real-world consequences regardless of our intentions.
So how does DiAngelo suggest we start to dismantle this white fragility
Well,
and engage in more productive conversations about race?
she emphasizes the importance of moving beyond individual guilt
Okay.
and focusing on collective responsibility. It's about recognizing the systemic nature of racism
Yeah.
and understanding how we all play a role in perpetuating it,
Got it.
whether consciously or unconsciously.
She also talks about the importance of developing a capacity for racial stamina, right?
Yes, and that means being willing to sit with the discomfort of
Oh.
examining our own biases and complicity, even when it's challenging.
Yeah.
It's about understanding that these conversations are necessary
Right.
for us to move towards a more just and equitable society. And it's not about achieving some kind of perfect state of enlightenment, right?
Right.
It's about continuous learning and growth.
Absolutely. DiAngelo encourages white people to approach this work with humility
Okay.
and a willingness to learn from their mistakes. It's about developing a lifelong commitment to challenging racism,
Yeah.
both within ourselves and in the world around us.
This is definitely a lot to unpack,
Yeah,
but it feels like we're just scratching the surface here.
for sure.
What else does DiAngelo highlight as being crucial to understanding this concept of whiteness?
One crucial aspect is understanding how whiteness is constructed in relation to blackness. DiAngelo argues that you can't have one without the other. They define each other.
So it's not just about understanding white privilege.
Right.
It's about understanding how that privilege is directly linked to the oppression of Black people.
Precisely. DiAngelo calls this specific dimension of racism anti-blackness. It's about the deep-seated fear and resentment that arises from the realization that white privilege comes at the expense of Black suffering.
And she argues that this anti-Blackness is woven into the very fabric of American society. Right?
Exactly.
Okay.
She points to historical examples like the emergence of race science we talked about earlier, which sought to justify slavery and white supremacy.
Right.
And she connects this to contemporary examples,
Okay.
like the outrage over affirmative action, or the disproportionate portrayal of Black people as criminals in the media.
It's like she's saying that we can't understand whiteness without understanding its relationship to Blackness. They're two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. And that relationship is fraught with tension. DiAngelo argues that the white collective needs Blackness to define itself, yet simultaneously fears and resents it.
Okay, so how does this anti-Blackness manifest in everyday life? It's not like most people are walking around consciously thinking, I need to oppress Black people to maintain my own sense of superiority.
Right. It's often much more subtle and insidious than the DiAngelo talks about how anti-Blackness operates through what she calls white racial framing.
Can you explain what she means by that?
It's essentially the lens through which white people view the world,
Okay.
shaped by their upbringing in predominantly white environments and a culture saturated with racist ideologies.
So it's like a set of unconscious biases and assumptions that we've internalized without even realizing it.
Exactly. And this framing leads to certain patterns of behavior,
Okay.
like associating whiteness with positive attributes, like innocence, purity, and intelligence, while Blackness is often linked to negative stereotypes, like criminality, laziness, or danger.
And these stereotypes then justify discriminatory practices.
Right.
Like racial profiling by law enforcement or the underfunding of schools in predominantly Black neighborhoods.
Precisely. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, where the negative stereotypes are used to justify the very conditions that create them.
So how do we break free from this white racial framing? How do we start to see the world through a different lens?
DiAngelo emphasizes the importance of actively seeking out diverse perspectives and challenging our own assumptions. She encourages white people to read books by authors of color,
Right.
watch films and documentaries that center Black experiences, and engage in cross-racial relationships where they can learn from people with different lived experiences.
It's about stepping outside of our comfort zones and exposing ourselves to different ways of seeing the world, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's about being willing to listen to and learn from the experiences of Black people, even when those experiences make us uncomfortable.
So it's not just about reading a book or watching a movie. It's about engaging in genuine dialogue and being open to having our perspectives challenged.
Absolutely. And it's about recognizing that this is an ongoing process, not a one-time fix.
Yeah.
We're all products of a racist society and will inevitably make mistakes along the way. The key is to be open to learning from those mistakes and to keep striving to do better.
DiAngelo also talks about the importance of developing what she calls racial humility, right?
Yes, and that means recognizing the limitations of our own understanding of race
Okay.
and being willing to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers.
It's about approaching these conversations with a sense of curiosity and a willingness to learn from others rather than trying to defend our own positions.
Exactly. And it's about being willing to sit with the discomfort of not knowing and being open to having our perspective shifted.
She also talks about the importance of white people taking responsibility for dismantling racism rather than expecting people of color to do the heavy lifting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about using our privilege to challenge racist systems and to amplify the voices of those who are most impacted by them.
So what are some concrete actions that white people can take to start doing this work?
DiAngelo suggests a number of things, starting with educating ourselves about the history and ongoing realities of racism.
Right.
She encourages white people to read books and articles, listen to podcasts, and attend workshops that center the experiences and perspectives of people of color.
It's about doing our own homework and not relying on people of color to educate us, right?
Exactly. And it's about engaging in honest conversations about race with our family, friends, and colleagues, even when those conversations are uncomfortable.
So speaking up when we hear a racist joke or challenging a discriminatory policy at work.
Yes, and it's about supporting organizations that are working for racial justice,
Okay.
whether through donations, volunteering, or simply spreading awareness of their work.
It's about recognizing that dismantling racism is a collective effort that requires all of us to do our part.
And that effort starts with understanding the ways in which we've been socialized into white supremacy and the privileges we receive simply by virtue of our race.
Right.
It's about moving beyond that good-bad binary and recognizing that even well-intentioned white people can perpetuate racism.
DiAngelo also talks about the importance of the repair, right?
Yes, she stresses that it's not enough to simply acknowledge our mistakes. We also need to take concrete steps to make amends for the harm we've caused.
So what does that look like in practice?
It could involve apologizing to someone we've offended,
Right.
taking steps to change our behavior, or using our privilege to advocate for systemic change.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that our actions have consequences and that we have a responsibility to address the harm we've inflicted.
She gives a powerful example of how she repaired a relationship with a colleague after making an insensitive comment about a Black woman's hair right.
Yes, and it highlights the importance of humility and accountability.
Yeah.
It's about being willing to admit when we're wrong and to take steps to make things right.
DiAngelo also stresses that this work is ongoing. It's not a one-time fix, but a continuous process of learning and growth.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging that we're all products of a racist society and that we'll inevitably make mistakes along the way. The key is to be open to learning from those mistakes and to keep striving to do better.
It's a powerful reminder that dismantling racism is not about achieving some kind of perfect state of enlightenment, but about engaging in a continuous process of unlearning and relearning.
Absolutely. It's about acknowledging that we're all products of a racist society and that we'll inevitably make mistakes along the way. The key is to be open to learning from those mistakes and to keep striving to do better.
DiAngelo also addresses the issue of white guilt, arguing that it can be a paralyzing emotion that prevents us from taking meaningful action. She encourages us to move beyond guilt and focus on taking responsibility for our actions.
She's not saying we shouldn't feel guilty, but she argues that guilt can become a form of self-indulgence if it's not channeled into action. It's about recognizing the harm we've caused and working to repair it.
It's like she's saying that guilt can be like a starting point,
Yeah,
but it can't be the end point. We
No.
need to transform that guilt into a commitment to change.
exactly. And that commitment requires us to challenge our own white fragility,
Right.
to be willing to confront our own biases and complicity in racism.
She offers some practical advice for how to do this.
Yeah.
She encourages us to breathe, listen, reflect,
Yeah.
seek out support from others who are doing this work.
It's about developing a practice of self-awareness and accountability.
Right.
It's about being willing to have those difficult conversations and to do the work of dismantling racism,
Yeah.
both within ourselves and in the world around us.
So much of what DiAngelo discusses really resonates with what we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
about whiteness as property and how it grants these unearned advantages.
Right.
Is there a way to connect those concepts to the idea of taking action?
Absolutely.
Mm.
When we talk about dismantling racism,
Uh,
it's not just about addressing individual prejudice.
mm.
It's about recognizing and dismantling the systems that grant those unearned advantages to white people.
Right.
It's about using our privilege to advocate for policies and practices
Yeah.
that create a more equitable society for everyone.
So things like supporting affirmative action policies
Yeah.
or working to close the racial wealth gap?
Exactly. It's about actively working to level the playing field
Okay.
and to create opportunities for people of color to thrive.
It sounds like DiAngelo's work is really a call to action for white people
Yeah.
to become more than just not racist, but actively anti-racist.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that silence and inaction are forms of complicity.
Hmm.
It's about being willing to step up and speak out against racism in all its forms.
It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable world.
Exactly. And that starts with being willing to have those difficult conversations,
Yeah.
to challenge our own biases, and to commit to the ongoing work of dismantling racism.
This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about.
Yeah, me too.
What stood out to you the most from DiAngelo's work?
For me, it's the emphasis on the collective nature of this work.
Okay.
It's not about individual guilt or blame,
Right.
but about understanding how we're all part of a system
Right.
that perpetuates racism. And it's about recognizing that we all have a responsibility to challenge that system and to create a better world for future generations.
It's a powerful message and a reminder that this is a journey, not a destination.
Absolutely.
What will you explore further based on this deep dive? What aspect of this information resonated most strongly with your own experiences? We hope this has been a helpful starting point for your own ongoing learning and reflection.